What if the most horrifying crime in Hollywood's recent history didn't happen in a seedy motel or a drug-infested back alley, but in the $13.5 million Brentwood estate of one of the industry's most respected legends? What if the man behind The Princess Bride was murdered like something out of a Tarantino film? And what if I told you that wasn't even the most disturbing part? This is not a movie. This isn't a script. This is the real, brutal, bloody truth behind the double homicide that rocked Los Angeles and left even the most hardened LAPD detectives speechless. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. We're talking about Rob Reiner, Hollywood royalty, son of the great Carl Reiner, director of some of the most iconic films of all time, and his wife, Michele Reiner, a force behind the scenes, a woman of grace, intelligence, and compassion, both found butchered in their home. And today, we're going to uncover 7 disturbing details about that crime scene that no one in the mainstream media is talking about. You ready? Because this story, it's going to get under your skin. It began like any other unassuming Thursday in Brentwood. The kind of place where luxury Teslas silently drift down streets lined with palm trees and gates are so tall, they make you feel like you're living next to royalty, because you are. The Reiners lived in a neighborhood that doesn't just scream money, it whispers it. Discreet, controlled, protected, where even your gardeners are vetted and your Amazon packages arrive with NDAs. So when the first 911 call came in at exactly 3:38 p.m., emergency dispatch didn't panic. It sounded like a panic attack. That's what they thought at first. But then came the second scream. This time, in the background. Chilling, wordless, raw. That's when the dispatcher's voice changed. That's when the LAFD was sent into motion. But let's pause right there, because here's where things already start getting weird. The caller wasn't Rob's daughter, Romy, even though she was the one who discovered the body. It was her roommate. Why? Because Romy, according to that same roommate, ran out of the house so fast she couldn't even hold her phone. That detail alone, that should tell you something. She wasn't just scared. She was traumatized. She had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. But what was it? And why was the bedroom door locked when she first got there? Let's rewind just a few minutes before the 911 call. Romy lived across the street from her parents. Convenient. Normal for some in Hollywood circles where family often lives in close proximity. Whether for love, loyalty, or surveillance. That afternoon, she reportedly tried calling her parents multiple times. No answer. Now here's the thing. Rob Reiner always picked up. Even if he was annoyed. Even if he was busy. Even if he was in the bathroom. He picked up for Romy. So when she got to the house and found the front door unlocked, but the master bedroom locked from the inside, her stomach dropped. According to LAPD sources close to the case, Romy knocked. Waited. Knocked again. Then picked the lock. And when that door swung open, her scream could be heard from the sidewalk. That's not dramatization. That's what one neighbor confirmed in a now-deleted Reddit thread. So what did she see? Let's not reveal it all just yet. But here's what we can say. Rob Reiner's body was found on the floor. Michele's was in the bed. There were multiple sharp force injuries, but some of them weren't in places most would expect. And one detail made veteran paramedics step outside and vomit. Now, you might be thinking, how do we know all this? Simple. Because someone inside that crime scene leaked it. And that person? They didn't leak it for money. They leaked it because they were scared. Scared that this would be buried. Because buried is what powerful people do when the truth gets too dark. You see, within 2 hours of the 911 call, the LAPD press office issued a generic statement. The Los Angeles Police Department responded to a death investigation on the 300 block of Redacted. 2 individuals were pronounced deceased at the scene. The matter is under active investigation. That's it. No names. No suspects. No details. But guess what? Someone had already spoken. A nurse at the coroner's office reportedly told a friend, who told a journalist, that whatever they're saying publicly is only 20% of the truth. And that is why we're here. So what's the 80% they're hiding? What's in that leaked autopsy report that LAPD won't comment on? And why did one seasoned detective call this the most surgically precise mutilation he's seen in over 30 years? That's where it gets complicated. And bloody. You see, the Reiners weren't just famous. They were connected. to politics, to activists, to Hollywood unions. Rob wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a vocal political figure. He had enemies, not the kind that post mean tweets, the kind that leave messages in blood. Too far. You might think so, until you hear what was carved into the hardwood floor next to Rob's body. We're not going to say what it was. Not yet. But let's just say, it wasn't in English. And it wasn't a name. It was a symbol. One that shows up in only 3 unsolved murder cases in the last decade, all involving people who had files on certain public figures. Coincidence? Or message? Now let's talk about why this story matters right now. Because this didn't happen 10 years ago. It didn't happen before cell phones and Ring cameras and digital forensics. This happened in the age of surveillance. And yet, the Reiner mansion's internal security footage is missing exactly 12 minutes, from 3:17 to 3:29 p.m. Gone. Wiped. According to insiders, LAPD's digital forensics team retrieved fragments, but not full feeds. And those 12 minutes? That's exactly when the murders would have occurred. But guess what? A smart doorbell across the street, belonging to Romy's roommate, did capture someone leaving the house. A figure, wearing gloves, carrying something. We'll dig into that later. But what if I told you that figure was not Rob or Michele Reiner? And it wasn't Nick either. Yes, Nick Reiner, the Reiner's son, who lived in the guest house, who was home that day, and claims he slept through everything. Except, there's one problem with that alibi. He was seen on his own front lawn at 3:21 p.m., standing, staring, wearing a hoodie, holding a phone. But he swears he never heard a thing. You buying that? Because LAPD isn't. We've got a lot to uncover. A lot. We're going to take you through 7 deeply disturbing, hauntingly specific details that the police, media, and insiders have been trying to keep under wraps. Not just the mutilation, not just the missing footage, but handwritten notes, encrypted folders, unsent emails, a knife with no fingerprints, a daughter's warning, and a voice memo left on Rob Reiner's phone just hours before he died. Saying simply, they know. Get out now. Was it too late? Was this a warning? A setup? A ritual? Or something darker? Here's what we can promise. By the time we reach the end of this story, you won't just be shocked. You'll be haunted. Because some stories are never meant to be told. And this one was supposed to be buried with the bodies. But what comes next? What we reveal in Chapter 1. That will change everything you think you know about the Reiner murders. And no one saw it coming. What does it sound like when someone's world shatters in real time? Have you ever heard a scream so raw, it feels like it could peel paint off the walls? Because that's exactly what the LAPD dispatcher heard at 3:38 p.m. on December 14th. The first 911 call came from a cell phone registered to Jessica Lee, a 26-year-old screenwriting student and Romy Reiner's roommate. And the dispatcher didn't know it then. But that call would set off a chain reaction that spiraled all the way to the homicide division, the mayor's office, and even the district attorney's inner circle. Let's break it down. Jessica Lee's voice was shaking, on the edge of hysteria. But she wasn't the one in danger. She kept saying, "It's Romy. It's Romy. She just ran out of her dad's house and collapsed on the lawn. She can't speak. There's blood everywhere." And then, in the background, barely audible, a second scream. Muffled. Animalistic. Wordless. The dispatcher paused, leaned closer to the speaker. "Ma'am? Was that someone else? Was that Romy?" Jessica's reply? "No. I don't know who that was." Let that sit for a second. Because from that moment on, everything escalated. Now here's something strange. Jessica was across the street. Romy had stormed out of the Reiner mansion, eyes wide, hands covered in what appeared to be blood. She couldn't even form a sentence. But she managed to say one word, over and over. Floor. Floor. That's what Jessica told the dispatcher. And that's what chilled responders to the bone. Because floor didn't just mean someone fell. It meant someone was left there. And Jessica? She refused to go inside. She said Romy had warned her, "Don't go in. Don't go near it. Please." By the time LAFD paramedics arrived, less than 7 minutes later, Romy had collapsed onto the sidewalk. Neighbors had begun gathering. Phones were recording. And just before police cordoned off the block, one elderly neighbor, who asked to remain anonymous, made a chilling observation. She was shaking like she'd been electrocuted, like something had taken the life out of her without even touching her. Now let's talk about what happened inside, because this is where it gets truly disturbing. The first paramedics entered through the main foyer. The house was silent. No signs of struggle downstairs. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. It was like walking into a museum. But then they saw it, the blood, a faint trail, leading up the staircase. And at the top, the master bedroom door, slightly ajar. One paramedic, his name withheld from the press, pushed the door open slowly. What he saw inside, he still hasn't spoken publicly about it. But according to a fellow responder, he turned around immediately and vomited in the hallway. Not because of the blood, because of what had been done to Rob Reiner's body. Let's rewind for a moment, because there's a crucial piece of information you haven't been told. Romy didn't find her mother's body. She only saw Rob. When LAFD entered, they found Michele Reiner's body still in the bed, under the covers. Face down. That's not an accident. That's deliberate staging. Think about that. The killer, or killers, left her body in the bed, covered it, while Rob was mutilated and displayed on the floor. Why? Symbolism? Rage? A message? And if Romy didn't even see Michele, then the trauma that shook her to the core was based solely on what she saw done to her father. Let that sink in. Because if you're already disturbed now, understand, we're only scratching the surface. At exactly 4:02 p.m., LAPD officers arrived. Not just regular patrol cops. Within 10 minutes, the Robbery Homicide Division, RHD, was on scene. That's not normal. RHD doesn't show up for routine domestic calls. Their presence meant someone already knew this wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a double homicide. The paramedics had found what they called multiple sharp force injuries on both victims. And one detail made them request backup and immediate lockdown of the entire perimeter. Rob's body had been undressed, not just stripped, arranged. That's all we'll say for now. Because what was done to him, we'll get to that in the next chapter. But trust this, it wasn't random. And it wasn't a robbery. Let's pause and talk about the call itself. Because once Romy was taken into an ambulance and stabilized, the call log shows a second call was made, this time by LAPD. A direct line to the District Attorney's Special Victims Unit. Why? Theories vary. Some say it was because of Rob Reiner's political status. Others claim a note was found next to the body, a handwritten message with possible connections to past open cases. But here's what's confirmed. The scene was sealed before sunset. No press access. No coroner statements. No press conference. Everything went dark. Even neighbors were told not to speak to media. And that's when whispers started spreading. Across social media platforms, Reddit threads, X, formerly Twitter, and even obscure Discord servers, people began leaking information. Small things at first. A screenshot here. A blurry text message there. But then a voice note surfaced, allegedly from a medical examiner technician. And in it, the voice, trembling, rushed, says, "This wasn't just a murder. It was a performance. And Rob, God, I can't even say it out loud. They didn't just kill him. They desecrated him." Now, is that voice authentic? We can't confirm it. But it matches the timeline. And the fear in the speaker's voice? Very, very real. Let's go back to Romy for a second. After being taken to UCLA Medical Center, she was sedated. Her first full statement to police wouldn't happen until the next day. And when it did, sources say she broke down in the middle, collapsed, cried uncontrollably. She reportedly kept repeating, "I wasn't supposed to see that. I wasn't supposed to be there. They told me not to come." Now who's they? That part remains unanswered. But here's the strangest thing. Romy received a text message at 3:12 p.m., a full 26 minutes before the 911 call. The message read, "Don't go today. They're not alone." That message has since been deleted. But forensic analysts recovered it from the backup. The number? A burner, registered to no one, and pinged from a cell tower just 3 blocks from the Reiner home. Still think this was random? Still think this was just a domestic tragedy? Or are we dealing with something much darker? Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why did none of this make headlines the way it should have? Why did major networks cover the story with minimal detail, barely mentioning the cause of death? Why didn't the LAPD hold a proper press briefing? The answer may lie in what was found in Rob Reiner's hand. A single slip of paper, folded tightly, with one word written on it. We can't reveal that word yet, but we'll say this. It matches a name found on an old LAPD case file. And that case was never solved. So let's recap. We've got a panicked daughter, a mutilated body, a staged scene, a missing 12 minutes of footage, a mystery text, a word clutched in the hand of a dead man, and a Hollywood legacy shattered. But in Chapter 2, we go inside the master bedroom. We follow the trail of blood. We hear the whispers from the medics. And we discover what they meant when they said, "This wasn't a murder scene. It was a message." What does it mean when a murder scene looks too perfect? When there's no sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle, and yet the violence is so grotesque it could stop a seasoned crime scene tech in their tracks. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't even rage. This was precision. And that's exactly what police found when they stepped inside the Reiner master bedroom. A room that should have been a sanctuary, but instead became a stage for one of the most horrifying crimes in Hollywood history. Let's step through the doorway. You're walking into a master suite worth more than most people's entire homes. The floors are polished hardwood. The walls lined with framed black and white photos, snapshots of a storied life. Rob and Michele had been married for over 4 decades. Pictures of them at Cannes, at the Oscars, with friends like Morgan Freeman and Tom Hanks. But in the center of that polished perfection, a smear of blood, trailing across the floor, leading from the bed to the bathroom and back again. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't spattered like a crime of passion. It was a path, a ritualistic loop. And that's what first made the detectives go cold. Michele Reiner's body was still in the bed, tucked under the comforter, positioned on her side, as if asleep. Except she wasn't sleeping. Her wounds were described as clustered and concentrated, according to a leaked coroner summary, specifically in the upper back and neck area, like someone came up behind her and made sure she couldn't scream. No defensive wounds, no signs of awareness, just stillness. She didn't even have time to wake up, which means whoever did this knew exactly when she'd be alone, or more terrifyingly, knew she wouldn't fight back, because they weren't a stranger. They were someone she trusted, or expected. Now Rob's body was found on the floor, 5 feet from the bed, face up, naked, arms spread slightly, legs twisted unnaturally. The position was not accidental. Crime scene analysts later said it looked like he had been posed. But the most horrifying detail wasn't the blood. It was what was missing. Sources close to the investigation confirmed that Rob Reiner's genitals had been surgically removed. Let that sink in. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It wasn't a struggle gone wrong. This was intentional emasculation. And the removal was done with extreme precision. Not torn, not hacked, but cut. With a level of anatomical knowledge that suggested the killer had medical or surgical training. Think about that. Someone took the time, knew what they were doing, did it without leaving a single defensive wound on Rob's hands. Which leads to only one conclusion. He was incapacitated, drugged, tied, blindsided. We don't know for sure. But what we do know is that his mouth had been taped shut. The detectives initially thought Rob might have been tortured. But the wounds tell a different story. No burns. No bruising on the chest or arms. No broken bones. Just cuts. Purposeful. Targeted. Symbolic. And then there's this. According to forensic photographs leaked through a private Reddit forum, there was writing on the wall. Not spray paint. Not lipstick. Blood. Spelled out in large, uneven letters. Again. That's it. One word. No context. No names. Just. Again. What did it mean? Had this killer struck before? Was it revenge? Or was this a message meant for someone else entirely? Maybe someone still alive. Maybe even someone inside the family. The walls weren't the only place that had blood. Near the vanity mirror, detectives found a single bloody handprint. Too small to be Rob's. Too delicate to be Michele's. And it was smeared downward, as if someone was sliding to the floor. DNA tests are still pending. But one source says the handprint didn't match anyone in the household, which raises a terrifying possibility. Was there a third person in the room? Someone who got hurt, but walked away? Someone who witnessed it all? Or someone who left something behind without even realizing? Let's move to the bathroom. This part of the scene was never mentioned in any police report. Why? Because what they found in the tub was almost too bizarre to believe. The bath was empty, but inside it, neatly laid out on a white towel, were 4 items. A scalpel, a pair of surgical gloves, a handwritten note, and a USB flash drive. Let's break that down. The scalpel, clean, sterile, no fingerprints. The gloves, inside out, like someone had removed them carefully. The note, written in block capitals, said only, "Delete me." And the USB drive? That's where things get interesting. The LAPD has not released what was on it, but a source familiar with the investigation leaked that the flash drive contained 2 video clips, 1 encrypted file, and a folder titled December 3rd, Final. Now December 3rd? That's 11 days before the murder. What happened then? We'll get to that in Chapter 3, because what Rob recorded that day might have been the exact reason he died. Now let's return to the blood trail, because this part is almost cinematic. The trail led from Rob's body toward the walk-in closet, but then it turned sharply, curved back around the bed, and ended at the window seat overlooking the backyard. Why would someone bleed their way to a window? Unless they wanted someone to see. Or unless they were dragged. Crime scene investigators say the drag marks were faint, but present. A slight smudge across the floor. Tiny threads caught on the wood grain, fibers from Rob's shirt. So here's the theory. He wasn't killed instantly. He was moved. From the closet? From the hallway? Why? To stage him? To send a message? And more disturbingly, was Michele already dead when this happened? Or was she forced to watch? That's a question no one wants to ask, but someone has to. Because the positioning of her body, on her side, eyes open, mouth slightly parted, suggests she may have seen it all before her final breath. Let's not forget the sounds. Remember Romy's scream? The second one. There's a growing theory that Romy wasn't alone in the house when she walked in, that someone else was still in the master bedroom. And when she cracked that door open, she didn't just see her father. She heard a sound, a whisper, a shuffle, a breath. Because why else would she run so fast? Why else would she say, "Don't go in, don't go near it"? What did she hear? Who, or what, was still there? And did that person slip out the back door? Or are they the same shadowy figure caught on the neighbor's Ring camera at 3:29 p.m.? Exactly 9 minutes before the 911 call. Wearing dark clothes, a hoodie, and carrying something wrapped in cloth. By the time CSI finished documenting the scene, the sun had set. Brentwood's quiet streets were lit by flashing red and blue lights. The Reiner house was sealed. Evidence bags were packed. And in the middle of it all, one detective, quoted off the record, said something that sent a chill through every spine in the room. This isn't just murder. This is theater. And whoever wrote the script knew exactly what they were doing. But in Chapter 3, we uncover what that script might be. Because remember that USB drive? The one that said "delete me"? Someone decrypted part of it, and the footage inside is reportedly the last video Rob Reiner ever recorded. And in it, he mentions a name, a very famous name, and a very powerful one. But what comes next would shake even the most cynical investigator. And no one saw it coming. Why would a killer go out of their way to make a crime feel personal? Not loud, not chaotic, not impulsive, but deliberate, measured, almost intimate. That's the question detectives kept asking themselves as they stood in the hallway outside the master bedroom, staring at one line in the preliminary report that instantly changed how this case was classified. Because up until that moment, investigators were split. Half thought this was a targeted home invasion. The other half suspected a domestic tragedy that spiraled out of control. That single line erased both theories. And once it did, the room went silent. This wasn't just a homicide anymore. It was a message. Let's start with what the police won't say out loud. The injuries to Rob Reiner weren't random. They weren't consistent with a struggle. They weren't consistent with panic. According to forensic consultants brought in quietly, outside the usual rotation, what was done to Rob required time, intent, and anatomical knowledge. Not rage. Not fear. Control. That's why one senior investigator reportedly said, this wasn't about killing him. The killing was almost secondary. Think about that. What kind of person doesn't just want someone dead, but wants to say something through how they do it? What kind of person wants the discovery to linger? To haunt? To humiliate? That's when the case stopped being treated like a robbery or a domestic incident and started being handled as symbolic violence. And symbolic violence always points back to history. Here's the contradiction that stopped detectives cold. Rob Reiner had no known enemies in the traditional sense. No public feuds. No restraining orders. No recent lawsuits. No threats reported to LAPD. In fact, friends described him as cautious but open, politically outspoken but careful, and paranoid only in the way powerful people tend to be. So why would someone do this to him? Why not just kill him quietly? Why leave behind something so shocking that even seasoned responders struggled to process it? The answer may lie in what Rob had been doing in the weeks before his death, and that's where this story takes a turn. According to two separate sources close to the family, Rob had become increasingly unsettled in early December. He canceled meetings, postponed travel, ignored calls he normally would have returned immediately, and most telling of all, he stopped sleeping in the guest bedroom when Michele was away, choosing instead to sleep fully dressed in the master bedroom. Why would someone do that? Fear, not panic, not anxiety. Fear rooted in expectation, as if he believed something was coming, and he was waiting for it. Now let's talk about December 3rd. Remember that date? The folder name on the USB drive. 11 days before the murders. That day, Rob had a private lunch with someone whose name does not appear on any public calendar. No assistants, no phones, no staff, just the two of them. The lunch lasted under an hour. And according to a valet who later spoke anonymously, Rob left, visibly shaken, hands trembling, face pale, got into his car without saying a word. That evening, Rob reportedly recorded a private video message. Not for social media, not for press, for himself, and maybe for insurance. In the clip, described by someone who has seen part of it, Rob looks directly into the camera and says, "I've kept quiet long enough. If anything happens to me, this explains why." He pauses, then adds, "This isn't about politics. This is about power. Let that land. Because power doesn't kill over money. Power kills over exposure." Here's where the case becomes deeply uncomfortable. Several detectives quietly raised the possibility that what happened to Rob was meant to strip him of authority, not just life. A symbolic act. One that has appeared in other high-profile cases involving whistleblowers, defectors, or people perceived to have broken rank. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, no official connection has been made. But investigators did note similarities between this crime and 3 older cases in California that were never solved. Different victims, different circumstances, same underlying message. Each time, the victim was believed to have been preparing to release information that could damage powerful individuals. Each time, the investigation stalled. Each time, the public narrative shifted quickly and then went quiet. Coincidence or pattern? You decide. Let's bring this back to the Reiner home. Because while Rob was the focal point of the message, Michele's role may be just as important. Detectives found no indication that Michele fought back. No overturned furniture. No broken lamps. No defensive injuries. That suggests one of two things. Either she was completely taken by surprise, or she recognized the person who entered the room. Someone she trusted. Someone she didn't believe would hurt her. And here's the chilling part. According to a leaked portion of the coroner's notes, Michele's injuries suggest she was incapacitated almost immediately. No prolonged struggle. No movement around the room. Which means she may not have known what happened to Rob until the very end. Or worse, she knew exactly what was happening, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Now let's talk about the psychological profile. Who does this? Not a burglar. Not a jealous lover. Not a panicked family member. This was someone calm. Someone prepared. Someone who wanted the scene to be understood by the right people. Because remember the word written on the wall? Again, that wasn't for the public. That wasn't for the family. That was for someone else. Someone who would recognize it immediately. Someone who would understand the warning. Investigators quietly reached out to federal contacts within days. Not officially. No paperwork. Just conversations. And those conversations all circled back to the same uncomfortable possibility. This wasn't an isolated act. It was a continuation. And Rob Reiner wasn't the beginning. He was the reminder. By now, you're probably asking the same question detectives asked. If this was a message, who was supposed to receive it? Was it meant for someone in Hollywood? Politics? Media? Or was it meant for someone inside the Reiner family itself? Because there's one more detail we haven't talked about yet. Something small. Something easily overlooked. When Rob's body was discovered, he was holding something in his hand. Not a weapon. Not a phone. A folded piece of paper. At first, responders thought it was trash. But when they unfolded it, they froze. Because written on that paper was a single name. A name that appears nowhere in the media coverage. A name that has not been released publicly. A name that appears, quietly, in multiple sealed court documents. And that name is connected to the guest house, connected to a phone, connected to a lie that is about to collapse. In Chapter 4, we turn to the person who discovered the scene. The daughter who ran. The daughter who screamed. The daughter who may know more than she's saying. Because what Romy saw wasn't just her father. It was the truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What happens to your brain when you witness something you're not supposed to? Does it shut down? Does it block the memory? Or does it cling to every gory detail, etching it into your soul? So no matter how hard you try to forget, it keeps whispering. You saw it. You saw it all. That's where Romy Reiner found herself on December 14th. She wasn't just Rob and Michele's daughter. She became the first witness, the first to scream, the first to run, and possibly the only one still alive who knows what really happened inside that house. But here's the real question. Is she telling everything? Let's rewind to 3:12 p.m., just 26 minutes before the first 911 call. Romy receives a text. Anonymous number. Short message. Don't go today. They're not alone. Creepy? Absolutely. Threatening? Yes, but also oddly protective. It's not, don't go or you'll die. It's, don't go because someone else is there. Now, Romy ignored it. Why? That's unclear. Was it a prank? Was it from a concerned insider? Or was it already too late? We may never get a straight answer. But when she walked into her parents' home at around 3:25 p.m., what she found changed her forever. We know she entered through the front. The door was unlocked. No signs of forced entry. No barking dogs. Nothing broken. Just quiet. Dead quiet. Her plan was simple. Check in on her mom, grab a folder Rob said he left in the study, and head to yoga by 4. But she never made it to the study, because halfway up the stairs, she smelled something. Metallic. Sharp. Wrong. That smell? Blood. Anyone who's been around it in large quantities will tell you. It's unmistakable. And once you smell it once, you never forget it. That's when she saw the smudge. A faint red mark on the wall, just before the master bedroom. And the door? Closed. But not locked. She pushed it open, and the next few seconds would rip a hole through her life. Let's break this part carefully. According to first responders, Romy told police she saw her father's legs first, sticking out from behind the bed. She thought he'd fallen, that maybe he was having a heart attack. She called out to him. No answer. She stepped into the room, and that's when her brain started to short-circuit. Because Rob Reiner wasn't just lying on the floor. He was positioned, naked, face up, eyes open, and, here's the most horrific part. His mouth was covered with tape, but his eyes had been forced open, possibly post-mortem. She saw the blood. She saw what had been done to him. And then, she screamed, dropped her phone, ran. But the timeline here gets tricky, because that scream, it was heard by a neighbor at 3:32 p.m. Yet the 911 call from Jessica Lee, her roommate, doesn't come in until 3:38 p.m. That's a 6-minute gap. What happened during those missing 6 minutes? We have only fragments. According to Jessica's statement, Romy burst into the house, shaking uncontrollably. She kept saying, "It's Dad. It's bad. It's bad. Don't go in." Jessica said she tried to get Romy to sit down, but she was pacing, hyperventilating, repeating the same phrases. His face. His face. There's a word. There's a word. What word? Jessica couldn't get it out of her. And Romy? She refused to speak for the next 2 hours. Wouldn't talk to paramedics. Wouldn't talk to police. Only after sedation and observation at UCLA did she calm enough to form a complete sentence. He wasn't alone in there. Let that hang. He wasn't alone in there. Could she mean Michele? Possibly. But the way she said it, shaking her head, eyes wide, it didn't sound like she meant her mother. It sounded like someone else was still there when she opened the door. Here's where things get even darker. When police questioned Romy later, they asked her directly, "Did you see anyone else?" She paused. She shook her head and said, "No, just him." But her body language, according to those present, told a different story. Her hands trembled. She avoided eye contact. And when one officer pressed her, "Are you sure?" her answer was quiet, almost a whisper. "I don't know what I saw." That may sound vague, but to detectives, it rang alarm bells. Because there's only 2 reasons a witness would say that. They were so traumatized they genuinely couldn't process what they saw. They were protecting someone. Now let's not forget who Romy is. She's not just a victim's daughter. She's a Hollywood insider, a writer, a producer, someone who understands optics, legal language, and, most importantly, media silence. That's why her total disappearance from the public eye in the days following the murders was so unusual. No statements, no interviews, no family spokesperson, just gone. And then, 1 week later, checked into a mental health facility in Malibu. Not for depression, not for trauma. The intake form, leaked by an employee, listed her reason for admission as acute paranoia, visual hallucinations, repeated fixation on symbolic language. What does that mean? It means she was obsessing over something she saw in that room, something written, or drawn, or maybe whispered. Back to that one phrase. There's a word. We know from crime scene photos that a single word, again, was written in blood on the master bedroom wall. But what if that's not the only word? What if there was another one? One only Romy saw? One she can't forget? Or one she's been told not to mention? Sources say LAPD quietly administered a polygraph. Unofficial. Voluntary. Romy passed, mostly. Until they asked one specific question. Did you see anyone else in the room besides your father? Her heart rate spiked. Her breathing changed. And the results? Inconclusive. Not a failure. But not a pass either. Which in polygraph terms is code for she's hiding something. But here's the kicker. 3 days after the murders, while Romy was still in UCLA, someone used her personal laptop. A MacBook registered under her name. IP log showed a login from her home across the street from the Reiner estate. And during that login, one document was opened. A journal entry, dated December 5th. The entry reads, "He asked me not to tell her, but I think she knows. There's something in the scripts. In the old ones. Something he buried. If she finds it first, it's over. Who's he? Who's she? And what's in the scripts?" Police seized Romy's laptop, but that journal entry has never been released in full. All we have are fragments. But the implications? Staggering. Because it suggests Romy knew something was brewing. Something secret. Something connected to Rob's past, and possibly to Michele's. Was it an affair? A family feud? Or something bigger? A truth Rob was preparing to reveal? A betrayal someone wanted buried forever? Let's talk about the scripts. Rob Reiner wrote dozens, produced even more. His archives are vast. But among them, detectives discovered 4 unproduced screenplays, never registered with the WGA, never copyrighted. Just stored on USB drives, locked in a safe. And the folder names? All dates. December 3rd, December 5th, December 9th, December 13th. Each one closer to the day of the murder. Each one, allegedly, a fictionalized version of something real. Investigators are still decoding what's inside, but early reports say the characters are recognizable. Thinly veiled versions of real people. People still working in the industry. People with something to lose. And that's why some detectives believe the daughter may have seen more than a murder. She may have seen the truth, personified. So what now? Romy is reportedly still under care. No public appearances. No new statements. But friends say she's changed. Quiet. Withdrawn. Terrified. One even claimed she asked them, "What if they come back for me?" Not, "What if they find the killer?" Not, "What if they arrest someone?" But what if they come back? That one sentence says everything. It means Romy believes this isn't over. It means the killer isn't a stranger. It means she might still be in danger. And it means the next move isn't the police's. It's hers. But in Chapter 5, we leave the crime scene behind and look outward. Because the moment the news broke, Hollywood reacted in fear. Phone calls, cancellations, lawyers. One actor even boarded a private jet and left the country that night. Why? What did they know? And more importantly, what were they afraid would come next? How does an industry built on secrets react when one of its own is slaughtered in broad daylight? It doesn't scream. It doesn't mourn. It tightens the circle. And that's exactly what Hollywood did when news broke that Rob and Michele Reiner were found murdered inside their Brentwood mansion. There were no tributes, no candlelight vigils, no red carpet dedications, just silence. And beneath that silence, a quiet panic that spread faster than gossip at a wrap party. Let's start with the first 48 hours after the murder. December 14th, the bodies are found. December 15th, a generic LAPD statement is released to the press. No names, no details, Just death investigation, Brentwood residents, and the ever-vague, no threat to the public. But Hollywood insiders? They knew. Because by midnight, 5 agents from 3 top talent agencies had sent the same text to their clients. Do not comment on the Reiner case. No statements. No tweets. Why? Why would agencies rush to muzzle their stars over a case that, publicly, was still being called a death investigation? What were they afraid of? The answer may lie in Rob's unreleased work. As we mentioned before, Rob had been working on 4 unregistered screenplays, each allegedly drawing on real-life experiences. And according to someone who briefly worked as an assistant in his office, at least one of those scripts was a thinly veiled exposé of Hollywood's most protected circles. He wasn't just writing drama. He was documenting secrets, the former assistant told an anonymous forum. Not directly. But if you knew the names, the stories, you could connect the dots. So when Rob died, and his laptop, his safe, and his handwritten notes were suddenly part of a homicide investigation, it set off a chain reaction that sent tremors through the elite. Because if those scripts made it to police, if they were decrypted, names would fall. Let's talk about who reacted first. You'd think it would be Rob's closest collaborators, maybe his friends in the industry. Instead, it was his enemies. Or rather, people who had once clashed with him behind closed doors. We won't name them yet, but here's what we know. One high-powered producer deleted his Twitter within hours of the news breaking. A prominent actor known for working with Rob in the 90s canceled a scheduled press appearance in New York and flew to a private villa in St. Bart's. Another well-known studio executive had her legal team issue a blanket NDA reinforcement to all her former assistants and interns. Coincidence? Maybe. But unlikely, especially when the calls to crisis PR firms tripled in the same window. One former TMZ producer revealed something even more damning. We got calls begging us not to run the story. From publicists, from lawyers, even from people not connected directly to the Reiners. Like, why would a former FX network executive care what we posted about Rob? Because sometimes, it's not about the story itself. It's about what the story might lead to. And in this case, it might have led to the wrong person asking the right questions. Now let's talk about the list. We mentioned this in Chapter 1, but now it's time to dig deeper. Inside Rob's desk drawer was an envelope, unmarked, unsealed. Inside, a single sheet of paper. 5 names, written by hand. No titles, no explanations, just names. Every one of them a major player in Hollywood. Some active, some retired, but all still powerful. What did those names mean? Were they targets? Collaborators? Enemies? Or witnesses? One detective reportedly asked aloud, "Is this a hit list or a warning?" No one had an answer. But when police ran those names through their internal database, 2 of them came back linked to sealed investigations, and 1 had previously been listed as a protected source in an FBI corruption case from 2017. Yeah, we're in that kind of territory now. Here's where things get weirder. Remember that USB drive found in the master bathroom? The one labeled "Delete Me"? It had encrypted files, yes, but it also had 2 videos, and one of them was allegedly a screen test, shot in Rob's private office. The footage shows 2 men, faces blurred, reading lines from an unproduced script titled "The Fifth Chair." Never registered, never mentioned, but within the dialogue, there are direct references to real events in Hollywood history. Events that were never made public, conversations that happened behind closed doors, decisions that destroyed careers. And when detectives saw how detailed it was, they made the decision to seal the footage indefinitely. Why? Because what was said on camera couldn't have been made up. It was too specific, too risky, too true. Now, back to the panic. Over the following week, Hollywood insiders did what they do best. They sanitized. Old interviews vanished. Instagram accounts were scrubbed. LinkedIn profiles were made private. Even IMDb pages were edited. Suddenly, collaborators who had worked with Rob a dozen times claimed they hadn't spoken to him in years. Producers who had fought for meetings now called him distant and semi-retired. The distancing was calculated. The fear was real. One former director said off the record, "Everyone's scared that if the wrong hard drive gets decrypted, they'll be the next headline." But that raises the question, what exactly was Rob sitting on? And why were so many people afraid of a man who hadn't released a hit film in years? Because it wasn't about the films. It was about the files. Let's shift to what insiders are calling the disappearance. On December 17th, 3 days after the murders, an actor known for playing a major role in one of Rob's cult classics vanished. Canceled interviews. Didn't show up to a panel. Ghosted everyone. His manager claimed he was on a spiritual retreat in Montana. Except there's no record of him boarding a flight. And his phone pinged in Mexico City. Why lie? Why run? Unless you knew your name was in one of those scripts. Unless you were afraid someone might come knocking. And maybe not the police. Because here's a darker theory making rounds in the underground forums. What if Rob wasn't the first warning? What if he was the last? What if the circle of power he tried to expose had already silenced others? And Rob? Rob was the one who got too close to the center. Someone who knew too much and refused to stay quiet. That would explain the brutality, the symbolism, the word written in blood, and the eerie phrase he said on that deleted voicemail. They know. Get out now. Was he trying to warn someone? His family? His daughter? Or one of the 5 names on that list? We may never know. But what we do know is this. Hollywood is watching. Carefully. Quietly. Desperately hoping this story disappears. But it won't. Because the next chapter takes us inside the guest house. To the one person whose alibi doesn't line up. The one man who lived just 30 feet away from the bodies. Nick Reiner. Rob's son. A screenwriter. A survivor of addiction. A man with secrets of his own. He says he slept through it all. That he heard nothing. That he saw nothing. But police found something on his hoodie. Something that didn't belong there. And what it was might break this case wide open. How do you sleep through murder? Not just one, but 2. In the same estate. Less than 30 feet from your own front door. That's the question Nick Reiner has been dodging ever since the night his parents were found mutilated inside their Brentwood mansion. The official story? He was asleep. Didn't hear a thing. Didn't see a thing. Didn't wake up until the cops were already at the front gate. But that's not what the evidence says. And what detectives found in his room could unravel everything he's claimed since the night of December 14th. Because sometimes, silence isn't innocence. Sometimes, silence is strategy. Let's talk about who Nick Reiner is. For those unfamiliar, Nick isn't just Rob Reiner's son. He's a former Hollywood writer. He co-wrote the 2015 film Being Charlie, a semi-autobiographical drama about his struggles with drug addiction and recovery. Critics praised the rawness, the pain, the honesty. But behind the scenes, things weren't quite so tidy. Nick had bounced between rehab centers since he was a teenager. He was in and out of treatment, estranged from parts of the family at times, then back in, then out again. His relationship with Rob? Complicated. They loved each other, but there was tension, and not just over drugs. There were financial arguments, rumors of creative theft, even whispers that Nick was trying to pitch a new project based on uncomfortable family truths. And just weeks before the murders, father and son had a blowout argument. Heated, loud, so loud, in fact, that a neighbor 2 houses down reported hearing Rob yell, "If you say a word about that, I swear to God, I'll end you myself." The context of that line? Unknown, but it's in the police report, and it changes everything. Now, let's look at the night of the murder. Nick was staying in the guest house. A sleek, modern 2-bedroom space with a private entrance, security cameras, and a balcony that overlooks the main house's backyard. According to Nick, he went to bed around 1 a.m. Didn't wake up until after 4 p.m. when the police banged on his door. But here's the first problem. A neighbor's backyard ring camera shows a shadowy figure walking across the property at 3:21 p.m., wearing a hoodie, carrying something in their right hand. That figure entered the guest house's back door 15 minutes before the 911 call. But Nick says he was asleep. So who was it? No one else was supposed to be there. And when LAPD reviewed the guest house's own internal motion detectors, they had been disabled by hand that same morning by someone with the code. Now let's talk about the hoodie. When officers entered Nick's space, they found it balled up on the floor near his bed, gray, smeared with something reddish along the right sleeve. At first, Nick told detectives it was just paint, but testing proved otherwise. It was blood, not visible to the naked eye. Someone had tried to clean it. But the forensic team ran luminol, and it lit up like a crime scene Christmas tree. Further testing confirmed the blood belonged to Michele Reiner, his mother, Now how does her blood end up on Nick's hoodie if he never entered the main house? If he slept through everything? His explanation? I must have brushed against something when the cops let me in later, but surveillance shows he never got close to the crime scene perimeter. He wasn't even let past the yard. So, how did it get there? Detectives asked the same question. So they seized his shoes. And that's when it got worse. The soles of Nick's sneakers tested positive for trace fragments of glass. Tiny shards, too small to cut him, but still embedded in the rubber. Police matched those shards to a broken wine glass found near Rob's body. A glass Nick swears he never saw, never touched, never even knew existed. But the glass was a vintage stemless Cabernet glass from a rare set Michele only kept in the master suite. So now we have a hoodie with Michele's blood, shoes with glass from the bedroom, disabled motion sensors, a mysterious figure on camera entering the guest house. And yet, Nick hasn't been charged. Why? Because there's still reasonable doubt. And one more complication. The DNA evidence on the wine glass. Partial. Not a match to Nick. Not a match to Rob. Not a match to Michele. A fourth person. Unidentified. Unregistered. As of this writing, that DNA remains unmatched in the system. Let's back up for a second. What could possibly be Nick's motive? He had money, comfort, access. Why would he want to hurt his parents? Theories vary. Some say he was angry about being cut out of a new estate plan. Others say Rob confronted him about a leaked draft of one of his unreleased scripts, one that allegedly painted Nick in an unflattering, perhaps criminal, light. One insider claimed Nick found something in those old scripts that scared him, or made him angry. Either way, he flipped. But again, no hard proof. Just smoke. No fire. And that's why LAPD still refers to him as a person of interest, not a suspect. Yet, there's also the issue of Nick's phone. When police subpoenaed his digital records, they found something strange. The phone had been off from 3:02 p.m. to 3:45 p.m., exactly during the time window of the murders. Nick claimed the battery died, but battery logs showed it was at 83% when it went offline, meaning it was manually powered down by someone holding it. Why would you turn off your phone during the 1 hour your parents were being murdered 30 feet away? Unless you didn't want it tracking your location. Now let's shift tone. Because while the evidence seems to point in Nick's direction, there's one more twist. One that complicates everything. In the early morning hours of December 15th, Nick received a text message from a number marked private. No number. No ID. Just 4 words. You saw too much. He showed it to police. Swore he didn't know who sent it. Didn't reply. Was it a warning? A threat? Or a manipulation tactic? We don't know. But that text? It was enough to make detectives consider a new possibility. What if Nick didn't kill his parents? What if he witnessed it? Was there when it happened, but stayed silent? Out of fear, or guilt, or protection? Which is worse, killing someone, or letting them die in front of you and doing nothing? Here's the kicker. Nick has since hired a private attorney and stopped cooperating with investigators. He refuses to speak without counsel. He refuses to submit to further DNA swabs. And he since left Los Angeles. His current whereabouts? Unknown. But sources say he's somewhere near Santa Fe, living on a secluded ranch. Minimal phone usage. No internet. No media. Almost like he's hiding. Or waiting. But for what? The investigation to end? The real killer to be found? Or something else? Something darker? Because here's what nobody wants to say out loud. What if Nick wasn't acting alone? What if he was the bait? The distraction? What if someone used him? Planted evidence? Or worse, recruited him? Because the person on that camera, the figure walking into the guest house, wasn't confirmed to be Nick. It could have been anyone. But whoever it was, they had access. They had knowledge. And they had a reason to be there. Which leads us to the next logical step. Because if the killer didn't leave a fingerprint, didn't leave a trail, but did leave a message, then what does that message mean? What does again really refer to? And could this be part of something bigger? A pattern? A string of orchestrated silences? Because in Chapter 7, we examine the knife with no fingerprints. A weapon that shouldn't exist. A blade that vanished from inventory 3 years ago. A murder tool used once before, in a case eerily similar to Rob Reiner's. And what it links to might be the beginning of an even bigger conspiracy. What kind of knife leaves no fingerprints? None. Not a smudge. Not a smear. Not even a partial. Not on the handle. Not on the blade. Not on the sheath found nearby. You'd think that's impossible. Even gloved hands leave something. Pressure patterns. Sweat molecules. Minute fibers. But in the case of Rob and Michele Reiner, the murder weapon was clinically, chillingly clean. Too clean. And that's where everything about this case shifts, from horrifying to calculated. The discovery of the knife came several hours after the crime scene was initially sealed. LAPD investigators were combing through the bathroom, a sleek, marble-lined suite with his and hers vanities, a standalone tub, and underfloor heating, when one of the CSI techs noticed something wedged behind the towel cabinet near the baseboard. At first glance, it looked like a grooming kit pouch. Black, rectangular, unmarked, but inside, a 4.5-inch, military-grade tactical knife. Slim, razor-sharp, no brand insignia, no serial number. Just a single scratched line running down the flat of the blade. A blade that would later be linked directly to every wound found on both Rob and Michele Reiner. Here's where things get disturbing. The knife wasn't a kitchen blade. It wasn't a hunting knife. It wasn't something you'd find at a local sporting goods store. According to an internal weapons analyst with LAPD, this particular blade matched only one known series, the Vanta X9, a combat-issued, Black Ops tool manufactured in small batches for high-security tactical units. Designed for close-quarters eliminations. Ergonomic grip. Heat-resistant steel. Non-reflective finish. But here's the catch. The Vanta X9 was discontinued in 2019. Officially. Unofficially, only 53 units were ever made. Most were destroyed in a failed military contract deal between a private weapons manufacturer and a now-defunct federal agency. So how did one end up in a Brentwood mansion? Covered in the blood of Hollywood royalty? That's the question LAPD has been trying, and failing, to answer. The physical analysis revealed even more unsettling details. The knife had no fingerprints, and not because it had been wiped. Wiping a blade leaves microabrasions, residue, smudging patterns. This blade showed none of those. It had been handled while clean, handled expertly, gloved with non-particulate synthetic gloves, the kind used by surgeons or professional contract killers. Even more disturbing, the blood on the blade had dried in layers, meaning it had been used, paused, then used again. Rob, then Michele. But why that order? And why the same blade? Why not use something already in the house? Because this wasn't improvisation. This was planned. Back to the scratch. The single etched line on the flat of the blade. Forensics initially assumed it was incidental, damage from use. But under infrared and ultraviolet scans, the scratch wasn't random. It was intentional, an encoded symbol, unmistakably deliberate, and when run through LAPD's internal criminal symbology database, it matched only one other case in the past 15 years. A homicide in Seattle, 2012. Victim, journalist. Manner of death, mutilation. Weapon, never found. But photos taken at the time revealed a similar wound pattern. The same placement, the same shape, the same odd symbol scratched onto the hardwood floor near the body. And you know what the killer wrote at that scene? Again, just like in Rob Reiner's bedroom, detectives immediately began comparing the two cases. The Seattle journalist, never named publicly due to a federal gag order, was reportedly investigating offshore money laundering tied to entertainment shell companies. He told friends he was onto something huge. 2 weeks later, dead. Scene staged. Laptop missing. Case closed due to lack of public interest. Until now. Because this weapon? It ties the two. The blade found at the Reiner home has now reopened that cold case. And you know what else? The journalist's brother now works as a digital security advisor for one of Hollywood's biggest media conglomerates. Coincidence? Maybe. But these coincidences are piling up. And someone clearly doesn't want them connected. Now, let's circle back to the night of the Reiner murders. How did the killer bring this knife in? Where did they hide it? No signs of forced entry. No broken glass. No disabled alarm system. And here's the kicker. The Reiner estate was equipped with magnetic field detection at all main access points. Meaning, anyone entering with a weapon or foreign metal object would trigger a silent alert. But that night, no such alert was triggered. The only way around that. You need the disarm code. And who had the disarm code? Only 5 people. Rob Reiner, Michele Reiner, their daughter Romy, their son Nick, The family housekeeper, Rosa. But Rosa wasn't even in the state. She'd left for a trip to Texas 2 days prior. So that narrows the list to 4. Or someone else with inside access. Or, here's the chilling possibility, someone who forced one of the Reiners to disable it themselves. Maybe at knife point. Or worse, with a promise. Let's dig deeper into the forensic oddities. Not only was the knife clean of prints, it was also untouched by dust. What does that mean? It hadn't been sitting in the house. It hadn't been stashed away long-term. It was brought in, used, cleaned just enough to not drip blood everywhere, then hidden behind the towel cabinet, somewhere out of reach. Almost like the killer wanted the police to find it. But not too soon. A delay tactic? Or a dare? And why hide it at all? Why not take it? Throw it away? Burn it? Because sometimes, killers leave weapons behind for power. To say, I did this. I got away with it. And you'll never touch me. And sometimes, they leave them as proof for someone else.